We begin our story in the year 1996. The Oakland Unified School District passes a resolution declaring Ebonics its own language, derived from African linguistic roots with heavy borrowing from English. These schools can now seek bilingual education funding for the teaching of Standard English. In this majority-minority school district, over 70% of black students are enrolled in special education classes, and another 64% are being held back a grade, a vast overrepresentation. This new teaching method aimed to bridge the gap and help African American students better familiarize themselves with Standard English concepts. Helping students. What a novel idea. Who would ever disagree with helping struggling children? Apparently, a great deal of Americans, both black and white. Civil rights leader Jesse Jackson called the resolution an unacceptable surrender, borderlining on disgrace. One of his main concerns was how an African American English speaker would struggle to find a job without mastering Standard English. Jackson, and many others, later realized that this resolution was an effort to increase proficiency in Standard English, and the uproar slowly dwindled. But would it be so wrong if schools solely taught African American English? Would these students' careers suffer as a consequence? No one language or variant is inherently superior than another. And yet, in America, all people are expected to speak Standard English. In a country founded by immigrants speaking all kinds of different languages, why are we now only able to accept one form of speech? My research examines how Americans perceive African American English compared to Standard English. In order to isolate the confounding variables, I'll record 8 audio samples. One where a white male speaks following Standard English conventions, and another with a black male doing the same. Then I will have a recording of a white male speaking with an African American English features, and a black male again doing the same. Then I repeat this process, but replacing the males with females. These groups are separated by race to investigate if African American English's negative perception is due to societal perceptions of black people. The gender separation is to examine the possible differences that African American males and females face when speaking African American English. I will then have groups of white males, white females, and black females listen to the audio and score each speaker's intelligence and sociability on a scale of 1 to 7. In my literature review, I examined research that found that African Americans rated black Standard English speakers as having higher competence, character, and sociability than speakers of black English. Another researcher supported this conclusion and also found that white Americans are less likely than black Americans to penalize speakers of African American English. The reasons behind this are difficult to explain, but it may be due to African Americans holding themselves to a higher standard in order to integrate with societal norms. A limitation of these studies is that they did not observe a white person speaking in black English. This is important because it does not isolate the credibility given to a black person regardless of their race. I reviewed research that found that people with white-sounding names were significantly more likely to get a job callback than those with black-sounding names. This shows that African Americans are given less credibility irrespective of language, making it vital to fully separate language and race to examine their effects independently. I intend to examine racial and language biases that speakers of African American English may face. I hope to teach African American English speakers about how they are perceived by white and black Americans due to their race and language. I want to prepare young African Americans for possible prejudices and help them understand how their language affects how they're seen. I want the general public to learn about implicit biases that they have and make them face the reality of how African Americans are perceived in society. The data I am examining is intelligence and sociability scores from people of different races, genders, and language varieties. With this data, I will be able to see if white people and black people have a different view of speakers of African American English depending on their race. By separating the language from race, we will be able to research if Americans perceive their own race to be more intelligent and sociable than those from another race. Investigating this data for statistically significant differences will help us establish how different sects of society perceive one another.